All right, today, ladies and gentlemen, we got the exemplary flooding the market, the Shroom man himself, the shamanic Los Angeles native, Funguys LA in the house
Yes, sir.
today.
Funguys LA. Funguys LA.
All right, we're gonna start from where are you from?
I'm from West Los Angeles. Grew up near the beach. So Venice, Santa Monica, that type of area right there. Has a lot of history when it comes to counterculture, culture in general, and that's exactly where I grew up.
What was that like back then?
It was a lot of fun, man. We live by the beach, so there's always something to do. It's probably too much fun. There's for a kid growing up, especially born in the '80s, man. You got surfing, skating, graffiti. There's gangs, there's girls, there's drugs. It's an exciting environment. It could be very distracting though, but I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world, and it's probably one of the coolest places to grow up in the world. I'm blessed to be from where I'm from, and I represent that shit to the fullest.
What would you say your childhood was like?
My parents were very young. They were into rock and roll in the '80s. My dad was in a band slash a drug dealer, um, and my mother was a good looking, lady that lived that life too. It was a music environment. There was a studio in the back house. He sold Quaaludes. He was making good money for about 4 years until he got busted in '88 selling Quaaludes. And so after that, he ended up leaving, and I had to move in with my grandmother. Me and my mother moved in with my grandma, and that's when things changed. So I went from a kid having everything I wanted to pretty much having nothing really, just a shelter, house over my head, um, and it was a real change.
So what band was your dad in?
He was in a local band. They used to play on Sunset, and they would battle like Van Halen, which ended up being very successful. Obviously, my dad's band didn't become successful, but it was that type of environment. Young parents, constant parties, music, drugs and shit like that. So I seen a lot at a young age as far as that lifestyle is concerned.
So your parents were living the fast life, you'd say,
Yeah,
if someone would describe that.
they were very young. It was very fast. It was the '80s, So if you know about the '80s, rock and roll, and everything that comes with that, that's how it was.
So what was the wildest thing you've seen? You said you saw all types of things.
They were always having parties at the house. So you're gonna see people doing drugs. You're gonna see a lot of like, sexual environment. There's young people doing what they do, partying. It was a complete party environment. You know what I mean? Just like a lot of people in that era. You could look at the movie Menace to Society. In the beginning part of that movie, Kane grew up in an environment like that. They're always having parties. There's older people teaching you things, showing you shit. You know what I mean? So you see a lot at a young age when it comes to that.
Were you into trouble? Were you a nerd? Were you
I was.
what kind
I
of
was.
kid were you?
I was I was cool. I was a super cool kid at first. I had a lot of, toys and a lot of people to play with and friends and cousins and shit like that. So it was cool until my dad left and I had to move in with my grandma, and then obviously the trouble started. Not having a father figure around. So a lot of kids end up rebelling and going down a wrong path when it comes to that. So the family got broken. And when, the family gets broken, the father figure leaves, usually the son rebels. And so I started doing bad in school, getting in trouble, and dealing with my traumas by acting out.
What age would you say this was?
This would be '89, so I was probably like 6 or 7, something like that.
So what did you start gravitating toward? What were you on? Baseball team? Were you doing sports? Were you you into girls? Were you skateboarding? Just trying to get an idea of what you were into.
For sure. As a young lad, I was into a lot of sports when my dad was around. He coached the teams, so he coached the basketball team. You know, I had trophies for baseball, football, all that stuff. Then I started getting I was into basketball and shit like that, playing sports, which eventually transitioned into rollerblading and then skateboarding. So we're talking like early to mid 90s, rollerblading was the shit. You know what I mean? There was like, you know, there was movies on that stuff, and there was this aggressive inline skating shit. You know what I mean? So I was kind of into that. But then that got played out, and you got to get on the skateboard tip. So we got into skateboarding. You know what I mean? And that was what we did. And then after skateboarding, we got into graffiti. And then from graffiti, we got into drug dealing, which is a classic chain of events that happens when you live in Southern California. A lot of people have gone down that route. So from regular sports to skateboarding, pretty much, and from there on.
What was the first drug you were introduced to, including, because most people don't consider alcohol a drug, but it is a drug?
It would be marijuana. Would be the first drug that I got introduced to. Cannabis, and I remember that day for sure.
What was that experience? Take us to that first day of who put you onto it? Where were you? You know what I mean? Did you feel nervous to do it?
So we were warned as kids that it was bad and it was a drug, and maybe, you know, going down the street by the basketball courts, you know, you would see some people smoking. Or there was an ice skating rink in Culver City, and everybody would go there as kids. You know, sometimes there'd be little badass kids smoking weed in the back. I remember some dude showed me like he had some shit like a roach in a newspaper, and he showed it to me. I was all scared and shit, you know? And I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? And then we had the DARE program back then. And so the DARE program would teach you about this shit, which really ended up making kids worse. You can look this up. This is just a statistic, because they tell you all about it. You're a little kid. They give you the rundown. And, you know, so I was in the DARE program. That taught me a lot. But my neighbor, he was the older...
So let's pause for a minute. So the DARE program didn't scare you or deter you?
No,
drugs?
it made you want to go in the streets and try all this shit. It taught you about graffiti. I remember it told me that these dudes would dip their clothes in water at 5 a.m, and they would wrap them around the metal poles, and they could stick to the poles and climb up the poles and shit and write graffiti. So like that, I remember as a kid, I was like, whoa, that sounds fucking crazy, you know? And they would tell you all about all these drugs. So no, it didn't deter you. It actually made you more, you know, curious about that stuff. And then I also live next to a famous graffiti yard called the Motor Yard, which is under the 10 freeway. If you're from West LA, you know about it. And a lot of stuff will go down under the tunnel. I remember looking on the tracks and always being like, oh, I wonder what's happening down there. And so that was a whole culture in itself. And that all played into the neighborhood I grew up in my, you know, how it influenced me.
For those that don't know what the Motor Yard is, what was so enticing about the Motor Yard?
It was mystical, and when you're a kid, it's powerful and mystical. So it's a giant tunnel underneath the 10 freeway that was full of graffiti in the 90s. I mean, it was started in the 70s probably, but in the 90s, it was in full effect. I mean, it was like beautiful graffiti art, but at the same time, it was the 90s, so there was like gangs and people doing graffiti and drugs, and you would just like, as a kid, you would be like, what is going on in that dark tunnel? And it would scare you, but it would entice you, you know? And eventually you get the balls to go down there and walk through it, you know? And it's kind of like the Red Hot Chili Peppers song, Under the Bridge, where they showed a tunnel similar to it, which was called the Belmont Tunnel. Same type of vibe. If you know what I'm talking about, you can look it up. But it was that type of an experience. So people were smoking weed down there, doing graffiti. You know, it was a kid, you look down there and it makes you real curious.
So take us back to that first time.
So the cannabis, my neighbor he smoked, we all kicked it, me and all the neighborhood kids. I was like not the oldest, but I was older than most of them. but he was the oldest. And so one day he was like, let's smoke some weed. He had a little roach, and we went to the train tracks by my house, and we hit it, and I got scared, you know what I mean? I took a little puff, and I got all worried, and I like ran away, and he's like, where you going, man? Where you going? And I was like, I gotta go, I ranked it, so I didn't get high or nothing, and I left, and then I told my mom's friend about this shit. He was a drug dealer. He thought it was real funny. And so he's like, yo, he's like, let me show you something, man. He's like, look in that duffel bag right there. So I opened this fucking duffel bag, and there's like 6 giant bricks of actually it was Jamaican weed, but it was like brown weed. And so the whole thing with that is he used to work at like a P.O. box spot, and he ended up stealing it. Someone brought a big box in there. He could tell it was like something. Some Jamaican dude brought it in there, and he popped it open, took the weed out, and put some like other shit in there and sent it. And so he had this big duffel bag of this brown Jamaican weed, and that was the most weed I've ever seen in my life. I was like, what the fuck? And so he gave me some. He gave me like a couple handfuls, and so I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to roll it up in like toilet paper or something, newspaper. I think it was a newspaper. I tried to roll it up in newspaper. I didn't know what I was doing. So, I showed my neighbor that shit. He rolled it up for me. I smoked it. I didn't get high though. Sometimes that happens when people smoke for the first time. They don't get high. Plus, it was like shitty weed. So I was like, I don't really know if I like this. I don't know if I like this. But the drug dealer dude that gave it to me, he was kind of a weirdo. And he was like, your mom smokes. You guys got to smoke together and have some kind of bond or some shit like that. So he convinced my mom to smoke with me. So he broke out some fucking kill, like the bombest bud for back then, some green ass sticky weed in a big bong. And so I lit that shit up. I took 2 big bong hits.
This was with your mother,
This was
too,
with my mother, which I know it sounds crazy. God rest her soul.
Your first time.
Yeah, we'll get into that. God rest her soul. You know what I mean? But yeah, it was with my mother. So she was a hippie. She was from that, that counterculture from the 60s. And so yeah, it was with her. And she wasn't too happy about it. She really didn't want to, but it's just how it happened. So I
You think she was pressured by the guy?
She was pressured by the dude, kind of. And but it did bring us close, and we did have this bond with cannabis for many years, which gave us, a nice bond. If you could, picture that, having something in common with your mother. She was kind of like my sister in a way, and my grandma was like the mother figure in the house.
Interesting.
And she was like my older sister. Is the best way to describe it. You know what I mean? So that's literally the best way to describe it. She was like my older sister. So we smoked. I got high as fuck, dude. I was like hallucinating. I was laughing and shit. I got the munchies, bro. And afterwards, I was like, yo, that shit was fucking great. I was like, I love this shit. You know what I mean? So I got some more of that brickweed, the Jamaican shit, and I went to my homie's house out in the valley in Woodland Hills, and we ended up smoking and fucking, it just became a whole part of my life. You know what I mean? It went from like once every month to every fucking day, all day long. Became a heavy cannabis smoker. My mother also was in the cannabis industry. Now, back then, the industry mainly consisted of like pipes and bongs and stuff like that, head shops and stuff. So she worked for a big company that sold glass to all the head shops. And so I was always around that shit, dude. Like, I would go to work with her, and I was just involved in that industry from when I was a young kid. Probably like 13 is when I first smoked weed, in 97. So, I was already in that culture, bro, like the cannabis industry in those late 90s, where cannabis went legal in 96 in California for medical purposes. And so I was around that shit a lot at that time.
So then, how do you go about encountering mushrooms?
Okay, so I started, smoking weed a lot with my homies. And then you start hearing about mushrooms. and my mom would tell me stories about them, and so would her friend, the older drug dealer dude. And so he's like, I was like, I want to try some other shit, you know? And he said, oh, I can get you some mushrooms. So we drove out to Downey and went to one of his homies' houses, and we got some mushrooms, but they were old, and they weren't that good. So we ate them, and then we ended up going in that tunnel I was talking about earlier, the motor yard at nighttime. We walked through, I finally got the courage, walked through that shit on the mushrooms, but I really didn't feel anything. But I remember tasting them, and they tasted like, you know, mushrooms that we eat now. But, so that was the first time that I encountered them, but I really didn't feel them. So then...
How many did you do?
It was probably like a fucking half an eighth or something like that, like some stems and a cap. They were old. They were like a couple years old. They weren't potent. They really didn't do anything. But we attempted to eat them, you know? We made the attempt. And so, in like high school, probably my first year of high school, my homie's like, yo, bro, me and the boy, we just ate an eighth last night. We were tripping. It was the funnest time, man. And I was like, oh, fuck, I want to try it, dude. So we ended up going to Santa Monica and scoring. This dude was selling eighths of these mushrooms that had these big gold chunks in the stems. He was calling them California gold stems. And when you ate them, it would crunch. And for years, I was wondering what that was. And being a mycologist later on, I realized it was big chunks of vermiculite, is what you put in the substrate to grow the mushrooms with. But I always thought they were just part of the mushroom. But as I became a grower, I realized it was big chunks of vermiculite. So all the mycologists would think that shit's funny, dude. Because they were like California gold stems, and you're chewing on these big chunks of vermiculite and shit. But they were bomb, though. So we ate them at like 5 p.m. or something in Santa Monica. We got on the blue bus. I think it was the number 2 or whatever Santa Monica bus goes from Santa Monica to Venice, because my homie lived in Venice, in the Venice Canal. So we ate them. And by the time we got to Venice, I got off the bus, the whole sky was purple. And we were just fully tripping, dude. We were laughing our asses off, and we had like a whole trip. And it was fucking epic, dude. I'll never forget that shit. They were very potent, and they were bombs. So we ended up, you know, ordering them all the time, and we just went on like a little scrimmage with those things, you know what I mean? Where we could just, until the plug dried up, we were just getting eighths, and we would just eat eighths because we didn't know. That was like the standard dose at the time. There was no microdosing. You know, we didn't even know. It was just like 2 fingers in the bag, eat the whole fucking bag, dude. And we were tripping balls, you know what I mean? It was like in the 9th grade or something. I was like, I don't know, 15 years old or something like that.
So after doing mushrooms your first time, it's because some people have, for the first experience, a negative experience with them. They're either in a bad place spiritually or emotionally, or they're going through something, or it's too much for them and they can't handle it either. The visions they see and the feelings they start to feel. Mm-hmm. So you could say after your first time, you weren't hooked, but you were like, this is something I want to engage in more.
We were young kids by the beach having the fucking most fun. We were laughing so fucking hard. We just loved that shit. We were in Venice, eating mushrooms, young as fuck, not a care in the world, no responsibilities, you know what I mean? It was fucking fun as fuck, dude. It was a great time, you know what I mean? Like, we had, you know, the visuals were amazing, the mushrooms were really good too. If I could guess, there was some type of a tie strand, I would assume from my experience and the way they made me feel, I think there were some sort of a tie strand, I could be wrong. But they were really good. Shout out to the dude that was giving us those things in Santa Monica. He rode a little bike around there with a backpack full of shrooms just on some late 90s stuff, dude. It was awesome, you know? And, of course, we were smoking cannabis with him and having a blast, man. Young kids and by the beach having fun.
So what's your next endeavor after high school? How does your life change?
Something that my mother told me, she didn't really like mushrooms because I was close to her. We smoked cannabis and we talked a lot. So she ate mushrooms a lot back in the days. And so when I was real young, I guess, my dad got some mushrooms sent from Hawaii, and they were fresh from one of his homies. They actually had like the cow shit still on them. They were picked, and he took a spoon and they ate them with honey. And they went to the fucking the Renaissance Fair, but they were with me, and supposedly they had a real bad trip, and because they were with me, and they were at this Renaissance Fair shrooming, and it was very irresponsible of them, you know what I mean? But that's what happened. So she told me, like, I don't like mushrooms, and you know they gave me a bad trip. So I was told that before, but it didn't affect me. I still ate them, I still loved them, but that was always in the back of my head. As far as my life. I started getting in a lot of trouble. I started doing a lot of drugs. You know, ended up getting in trouble in school. I got caught selling weed in high school by an Narc. Total entrapment, by the way. Funny story is, they tried to charge me 2 charges. One for selling a nickel sack of Mexican brickweed, and the second charge was having a conversation about mushrooms with another person that ended up turning out to be a cop and later on in life. But that charge was dropped because it was, you know, it was a pointless charge. But they literally tried to charge me for a conversation about mushrooms. It was on my fucking charge list. So I ended up getting kicked out of regular high school, failed all my classes because of that. They busted like 30 people, all my homies. This Narc got everybody. It was something they were doing back then. I don't know if they still do that shit, but they probably do, you know? Funny story about that Narc, he got his karma though. We were all smoking in the cut, and we told him to go look out, and he tried to lie and say, oh, the security's coming, right? So he didn't have to hit it. And so we all ran through a gate, and when he went to go run through the gate, he went head first into the gate, busted his whole fucking head open. He was bleeding everywhere. He was so pissed, dude. He was like, fuck. And I was wondering why he was so good at basketball. This fool was like a grown man, just fucking balling fools up. I'm like, what the fuck? This fool could slam dunk and shit, you know what I'm saying? And he was a bad fool. I remember he threw an encyclopedia at a kid's head when everyone was wilding out in class. He was macking up the girls. He was a fucking asshole, dude.
All right.
Fuck him, you know what I mean? But yeah, I got busted, so then I had to go to continuation school.
Wait, let's stop right there and go into a little more depth on something right there you touched on. Because I have a friend that went to Hamilton High School and was involved in something like you, where he was entrapped by an adult that was posing as a student.
Correct.
So we're gonna go into this a little because a lot of people don't know about this. This was literally fucking up kids' lives. I mean, so people that don't know, LAPD would put undercovers in the high schools, posing as students, and then befriend students. And then solicit them if they could get certain drugs. Is this correct?
That's correct, yes. I was warned about it by someone older than me. I didn't really believe him. He went to uni high school, and same shit happened to him. And he was like, yo, they're in the school, man. You know, you got to watch out. But I didn't really care. I wasn't even serving like that. I literally I didn't have much money back then, and I'd get the hookup on a big fat sack of like Mexican weed, and I would take half out, and I would sell the other half. You know? And so I met this dude in my class, and everybody knew him, you know, and he was doing that shit to everybody. You know, I just did it so I could get a little weed to smoke after school. You know what I mean? And he ended up on like right before the finals, when everybody's going to pass all their classes, they bust you. So you get all fails, you fail all your classes, you can't take your finals. They kick you out of the school, they force you to go to a continuation high school, which is way worse. It's just, you know, doesn't look good on your record. The curriculum's bad, the teachers aren't good, and it's a lot filled with kids that are doing bad. So a lot of bad kids are in that continuation school.
So, but let's talk about how this went about, because I think most people need to know about this, because I don't think it still goes on at this period of time.
It probably does.
But let's talk about how this should not be implemented, because it's basically, so go through that day where you're introduced to the student. What happens? Like, how did it happen? It's
complete entrapment. They befriend you. They become your friend.
So go into how you first met.
They come up and start talking to you. Hey, what's up, man? You know, you start talking, like, because it's high school, so everybody's real social. So, you know, he's in all the classes. He's in your class. You see him every fucking day. You see him at lunchtime, nutrition.
And this is an adult, once again, that
He's an
is
adult
posing as a student.
that looks young.
Yeah,
But he's a full-on adult.
That's posing as a
He's
student.
posing as a student.
Yeah.
So he's in the classes and he's doing shit. Like I said, he's talking to girls. He's throwing dictionaries at fools' heads and shit. You know what I mean? And he befriends you. He becomes your friend, and then you know what I mean. He hits you up and asks you, hey, you know where I get some weed? Or you start talking about weed. You probably start talking about it, and then it gets brought up. Hey, you know where I can get some? Whatever. But they're real slick. They're real slick with it. They know how to do that shit. You know, so. You're a dumb kid. You don't know how the game is. You know, you don't understand that these fools are out there being predators pretty much and preying on little fucking kids to ruin their fucking lives. They put you on probation. You know, like a lot of people end up going to juvenile hall because of this shit. You get a dirty drug test, they send you to juvenile hall. Then you're dealing with the system. You're in the belly of the beast dealing with the system as a young kid. Some fools never get out of this shit, you know? They ended up giving me a fucking felony for selling a nickel bag of stress in high school that I still gotta go fight and get expunged from my fucking record. I can't buy a firearm and protect myself because of this shit, even though now it's legal and I can't get it expunged. I have to go fucking do that. But it's just a whole chain of events. So they befriend you, they become your friend, they make the purchase from you, they end up recording it, documenting it, they keep going, try to get as much as they can from you for the whole school year. And at the end of the school year, when you're about to like graduate or pass your classes, they bust you, give you all fails in all your classes, and they kick you out of the school district pretty much, which makes your life really hard, you know? And they start drug testing you, put you on a straight juvenile probation. You have to go see a probation officer. You have to take piss tests, urine tests, and go to court, you know, and pay fines, and your mom and dad have to go to court with you. They're all pissed off, and it's a horrible situation, and it's complete entrapment. I mean, they try to befriend you, they try to be cool with you. Some kids are pressured into it, you know? They just want to be cool, they just want to be accepted. So they go score a sack for the dude and end up getting popped. For me, I didn't have money back then. So I just wanted to smoke for free, which a lot of people start selling weed like that for that exact reason. They want to smoke for free, they want to pay for it, so they start selling weed. So yeah, that's exactly what happened.
So that was your incentive for selling weed in high school, was an economic incentive, and you were basically evening it out and smoking for free in the end.
Correct. I like smoking weed. I wanted some weed to smoke. This was a way for me to, you know, get a couple joints or something for the day.
So what took place? Did that derail some of your high school aspirations?
Oh yeah, I didn't end up graduating. I had to go to a continuation school, which was we call it hood out here in Los Angeles. There's a lot of gang members in that school. You end up getting in a lot of fights. There's more drugs there. You know, it's harder to graduate. The graduation rate drops. You don't get to go to prom. You don't get to walk the stage. You're on probation for like till you're 18. You got to go take a monthly piss test every fucking month. And you know, we were still smoking. So back then we would buy these drinks at the head shops that would give you a clear piss test. You drink the fucking drink and you go take your piss test. And those things worked for the most part. I used to drink them all the time. Sometimes I'd slip up, get a dirty drug test. They'd threaten to send me to boot camp for 6 months. And so this shit really was, you know, traumatizing, bro. Honestly, it was fucked up, and it caused a lot of stress in those years for me, you know? And my parents, too. My mom had to go to court all the time. You know, this is a bad situation.
Yeah, you just touched on a good note, too, because you said most dudes that got entrapped in this, just like my buddy, my boy wasn't that got kicked out of Hamilton High School. He wasn't a dealer or anything. He, like you said, thought he was doing someone cool a favor.
Exactly.
And going to the man, getting something from, and they ultimately turn him over. Yep. He doesn't turn on his man.
No.
But so it's a really fucked up situation, you could say, that they're putting people in and ruining their records.
Definitely.
And even the morale issue, the morality of it, you could say almost.
Yeah.
Is like they're kind of pipelining. For those that don't believe in this,
Oh,
you
it's
know,
a fact.
pipelining the youth into this criminal
Yes.
system. Whereas,
Yes.
so do you think if, all right, none of that would have happened, that guy wouldn't have been there, and you would have continued as for, is for someone saying, oh, you might have ruined other kids' lives in there, or you might have introduced kids to marijuana there. But that's not really the case, right? For these people that say, oh, you should be kicked out if you were engaging in those activities
No,
in
because
school.
I wasn't just selling to soliciting kids like Narc was soliciting me. He came up to me and asked me for it. I wasn't just on the corner like, yo, I got fucking weed. You guys want to smoke some weed?
Yeah, you weren't advertising at lunch or in the basketball.
Yeah, I wasn't
court.
in the bathroom with like just selling sacks and like and telling, hey, you want to come over here and you want to smoke some weed and trying to corrupt people. Not at all. You know, he came up to me and asked me for some weed. You know what I mean? So in my eyes, that's entrapment. You know, I'm trying to be cool with the dude. I'm trying to have friends, and I mean, realistically, I was trying to smoke weed for free, but you know, I wasn't soliciting other kids and trying to corrupt them and get them intoxicated.
Yeah, it's almost like
for a profit.
You're creating crimes that don't exist.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And like we said, they put you into this line, so you get on probation, you end up messing up in the probation, you go to boot camp, you go to juvenile hall, you end up mingling gang members, more drugs, getting used to the system. These people turn into adults and they get institutionalized. I mean, it's the oldest trick in the book, dude. You know, this is a classic behavior for these institutions.
How do you progress out of this situation? Do you graduate from continuation school and move
So
on?
I ended up turning 18. I got kicked out of 2 continuation schools because I had problems up there with different people fighting and stuff that had to do with graffiti. So I ended up going to Phoenix High. Shout out to Phoenix High, which is Venice High School's continuation. Super fucking cool. Everyone was cool up there. I loved that school. And I turned 18 and I had 2 options. I could try to continue to graduate or I could go get a job and start making some fucking money. And at the same time, I could stop going to probation and say fuck them because I'm 18 and just dip out on them, or I can continue trying to do these drug tests and go through the system. So I said fuck probation. That's why they gave me a felony, because I dipped out when I was 18 because I'm no longer a juvenile. And then I ended up going and getting a job so I could make money, which was at a telemarketing spot. I was hustling on the phone and I was good at it and I was bringing home some shit, you know? And so now I could buy some nice clothes, I could buy weed, I could, you know, back then people had CDs and shit. I was buying some music and, you know, going out and having fun, man, you know? So I had a little change in my pocket, which was a change for me because, you know, my family lived in, you know, somewhat of a, the area wasn't the worst, West LA. There's little pockets that are bad, but, you know, it's a pretty good, you know, there's always food on the table and I had a roof over my head. But I had no clothes, I had no money and shit like that. So I needed to start, you know, moving and hustling.
How does that job at the telemarketing go? Do you move up? Did you enjoy it?
I used to kill it. I'm a fucking top-notch salesman, dude. I was selling, what we were selling, ink cartridges, bro, back in the ink cartridge days, you know what I mean? And there was a bunch of old scumbags that worked there, you know, and it was a lot of characters, and I was bringing home some money, you know. I started having some checks coming in and, you know, had some money in my pocket finally, because I wasn't selling weed or anything. I was on probation, and I was bringing home some money, so I was able to, you know, have some change in my pocket.
And so what goes on? Do you move up right there? Do you quit?
I quit or got fired or whatever. I probably quit and ended up getting a job at UCLA in the little cafeteria section, which was a pretty good job at the time. They had benefits, they paid you good, and it was, you know, I was young, and so there's a lot of girls up there that were older than me. College girls always hitting on me, you know what I mean? So it was fun, you know, and then I had more money to buy more weed. So that was the thing, man. It was like weed, writing graffiti, hanging out with the boys, skateboarding. That was the life back then. That's all we fucking did, you know?
So at this time, would you say you were addicted to weed? Was it a problem?
Yes, fully addicted to it. It was definitely a problem. My life could have turned out a lot different. Now, I don't regret anything at all, but I was definitely addicted. I definitely did things to get the money that I needed to buy the weed. And, you know, but it was a lot of good times, a lot of good bonding with a lot of good people. And, it does have its medicinal purposes, but, most people do abuse it. And I was definitely abusing it. And I was definitely addicted. I was a huge pothead. I could not stop smoking, no matter what.
So would you say the old theory they say weed is a gateway drug to other drugs that people say? Would you say that's true or no?
It's true and it's not true. It's not true because it's not like I'm gonna smoke some weed and I want to go shoot heroin. It's not true like you smoke some weed, I'm gonna just instantly go smoke some rocks. But it's true in the sense that it's the first drug that you come across as a kid, and it's probably the first drug that you do, and so you get high, and then depending on your environment and your circumstances and how much trauma you had, and really who you surround yourself with, the chances of you getting into some other drugs is highly probable. So, for instance, I never grew up in a neighborhood. There wasn't any heroin and shit like that around. But if there was, I might have got into it. But there was mushrooms, there was LSD, there was cocaine, and shit like that, which I definitely partaked in.
Definitely. So you're living the life, smoking weed. You're up at UCLA. What's after this?
After that, it got heavy into the graffiti thing, started using harder drugs, started getting older, and things started getting pretty rough. We ended up getting into, I hate to say this shit, but it's just like I said, the environment and what everybody was doing at the time. A lot of people started doing meth in my neighborhood, and everyone started getting strung out on that shit, including my mother, and a bunch of my friends' mothers, and like pretty much my whole neighborhood was like meth zombies at the time. And so I stopped working. I started just like got a girlfriend that was a drug addict too, and I went through that whole like drug addict girlfriend thing, which is fucking horrible. Darkest times in my life. And it got so bad that people started, some of the mothers started passing away from drugs and alcohol. So my girlfriend's mother passed away from drinking too much, and she had to move to Colorado. So I had a choice. I could either stay in the neighborhood and continue this path of drugs and like hanging out with the homies on the streets, and a lot of people were getting into some gang shit at the time, and it was getting real sticky. There was times where we'd all be hanging out, and people would drive by, there's guns involved and shit like that. And so, and what I mean by that is we'd be hanging out on the block, and people would drive by and pull out the guns. Where are you from? And like, a lot of meth and stuff like that. Just bad energy, everything bad about it. It's a horrible, dark lifestyle. So I had a choice to either move to Colorado with her and get out of the neighborhood and try to clean my act up, or stay in the neighborhood and keep fucking up. So I decided to move to Colorado so I could get sober, get out of LA for a second. And it was the best thing I ever did. A lot of the people that stayed in LA ended up going to jail, getting strung out. Some of these people are still homeless today. I drive by and see them all the time, tweaking on the streets. Meth and homelessness in Los Angeles is at an all-time high. If you're out here, that shit is bad. You see these tents all under the bridges. And so I got away from all that shit. I went to Colorado. I got sober. This was in 2006. So cannabis industry started booming in Colorado around 2008. So I was right there for the cusp of that. I got sober off the meth, and started working out there, and started getting involved in the cannabis industry out there, which actually led me to where I'm at today with the mushrooms. That was the beginning of my path with all that, because I started to learn how to grow cannabis out there, and that's what led me to growing mushrooms. So that move right there brought me to where I'm at today.
Let's rewind a little bit and speak on the meth part, because maybe you could help someone out. Maybe they're dealing with this problem, or they have a son or daughter that's going through this.
Definitely.
So what's the best What's the best advice? Because you said you overcame it and shook it, but you were on it bad for a while.
Yeah.
So what's the best advice you could give to someone that's on it?
I would say first and foremost, it's the worst drug of all time, besides fentanyl, obviously, which is something new that wasn't around back then. But a lot of people do both. And so meth is the worst. It just changes your fucking mind completely. It turns you into a big fucking weirdo. You don't sleep, you don't eat. It totally changes who you are. It's completely 100% chemicals. There's nothing natural about it. At least cocaine comes from a plant originally. This shit is just pure fucking evil. I could go into the history of it. I don't want to, but we could talk about Hitler using it. It's bad. This shit just creates nothing. Like, anybody on meth is just fucked. There's no getting around it. There's nothing good about it. So how I got off of it is I had to leave the environment that I was in, because everyone in the environment was using it. So even if I wanted to quit, it was all in my face. So the only way you have to get away from it. You know what I mean? So I had to move out of state. So I got enough time away from it to get sober and realize what I was doing and fight the urge and break the addiction. And we could talk about...
What helped you to do that, break the urge?
I was realizing how bad it was. I realized that I was going down the wrong path, that I wanted more out of my life, and that it was fucking horrible. You gotta really want to quit. You gotta get away from all the people. You have to quit being around those people that are using. You have to get away from the environment. And really, if you're on that shit, go seek help right now, because you're fucked. Honestly, that shit is the worst. And if you're using it now in 2023, I don't know what to tell you, bro. Like, it's real bad. Back then it was bad, but now it's worse. You know what I'm saying? But that was for 3 years of my life. I wasn't doing it for that long. It was maybe 3 years. But it was the darkest moments of my life,
Just so the people have this picture of what was the worst, sickest, darkest day you've seen of.
I mean, dude,
and if you could just describe it to someone.
Okay, so first of all, you don't eat, you don't sleep, you go crazy. Mentally, you'll go crazy. You end up getting these weird desires. So I was with the girl, that was on it too. That's the fucking worst, because they say this about meth. They say, once it's your wife, twice it's your life. Which means if you do it with your girl, you're gonna lose her, bro. You know what I mean? Because it makes people fucking do some sick shit. It turns people gay. It's known for turning people gay. Girls are cheating, fucking, meth whores and shit like that. I was cheating, fucking with all her homegirls. She was cheating on me, I'm cheating on her. It's a sick fucking world, dude. People get into just, it's bad. You know what I mean? That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to get too into the details. If you know, but it makes you, it makes you, you'll be working on something but not doing anything. So you'll, clean your house up, but really you're moving the furniture all around and just making this shit way worse. Or you see these fools just working on bikes in the fucking, for 8 hours a day, just fucking, you see 100 bikes under the overpasses these fools stole, and just fixing fucking bikes, just tweaking on this shit. So it's just it totally takes your mind, and you think you're doing something, but you're doing nothing, It's a weird fucking drug. It's all, not natural at all. It's 100% chemicals. It's ruined so many fucking lives. And we can get into my mother, because that's the whole thing. So my mother ended up getting strung out on it. She had a fucked up boyfriend that got her on it. And he was an ex-Hell's Angel, and so he gave her, I remember I seen it happen. I was in their little, at the work, and he was like, you want to try this shit? It's like coke. And he gave her a line, and after that, her life was over. And so, I didn't know it at the time for years, but he was beating her up, and they were doing meth, and it was just a downhill spiral, and so she ended up, fuck, dude, she ended up going on the streets, dude. My grandma kicked her out of the house eventually, and she was on the streets, and I tried to put her in a rehab. I took all my money, I got her off the streets, every little penny I had to put her in a fucking rehab to try to save her, and she ended up walking out of the rehab 2 days later, and they kept all my money. And she went, if someone doesn't want to be helped, you can't help them. So it was the hardest shit ever to see my mother strung out on drugs, living in the streets. It fucked me up. You know what I mean? And so that's how bad that drug is. And it's not just my mother. There's a lot of my friends' mothers that got strung out on that shit and ended up dying from it too. So eventually she ended up passing away from just being on drugs, and meth was definitely the main culprit in that fact, in that situation. So, fuck that shit. I hate it with all my heart, bro. It's the worst fucking shit ever. It destroys families. It takes people's lives. I got friends that are homeless, It's just the worst shit. That's the dark. You want to talk about the darkest thing? That's the darkest thing. It killed my mother. That's the darkest part about that shit. It took her fucking life. She was a beautiful person for a long time, and that shit turned her out. Now, as far as her boyfriend's concerned, he ended up getting his karma. I'm not going to get into it, but, he got his karma back. We'll just say that. You know what I mean?
That's deep. So, you're in Denver. You say in the weed
So
industry's blossoming.
Sorry to interrupt you. I get off the meth in 2006, and I'm doing good. I'm working at Sears selling lawnmowers. I was the #1 lawnmower salesman in the whole state. They couldn't fuck with me. You know what I mean? If an old lady came into Sears, bro, I was selling her a lawnmower, dude.
You were the #1 lawnmower salesman in the state.
Yeah, dude, I was getting awards for that shit, bro. Like,
wow.
Maybe not the tractors. These motherfuckers were country boys selling tractors, but if you were coming in to get a lawnmower, y'all was selling you a lawnmower. You weren't coming in the lawn and garden section not leaving with a fucking lawnmower, dude. Because being a salesman is in my blood. I'm not going to get into details, but I looked up my last name, and 80% of my family for the last 200 years were salesmen. I mean, this shit's in my blood, bro. I could sell, So I was selling lawnmowers like hotcakes. But I wanted to go back to LA, but I had to stay out there. I didn't have enough money. So then the cannabis industry started blowing up, and my homies were in LA. So I came back to LA. Let me start from there. I came back to LA one time, and back when I left, no one had shit. Fools were on skateboards, tagging and shit, doing all that stuff. When I come back, and out of nowhere, all my homies got fucking foreign fucking cars, Benzos, BMWs, El Caminos, and shit like that. Nice luxury apartments, condos. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? What are you guys doing? Because I've been gone for 2 years. They're like, man, we're selling weed, dude, We're making money and shit. And I'm like, oh shit. So we transitioned from graffiti into selling weed. This is what my friends were doing. So I'm like, then they're like, you got to start hustling, bro. And I'm like, oh man, I need some money. I'm trying to move back to LA. So I go back to Denver. And my neighbor used to sell bootleg DVDs. This is in that era. He was making money. This fool had a big house, Corvettes off of bootleg DVDs. So I bought a bootleg DVD burner, and I was buying bootlegs from him and then copying them. And that was my first hustle. I started selling bootleg DVDs, and I started making a little change as I was working at Sears. We get all the new shit, like American Gangster. I remember I killed it with that when that came out. We got it before it was out in the theaters. We were just making chips off of that. But then they called me and they're like, yo, bro, you need to start selling weed. Colorado's legal. We want to bring shit out there, So I'm like, okay, let me go get a cannabis card. So I get a cannabis card, and being the consumer that I am, I start going to the clubs and I'm buying all this good weed. And back then, Colorado if you knew the spot, it had some good weed. There was just a few spots. A lot of that shit was boof because it's so dry out there that it turns to dust real quick. But there was a couple spots, shout out to Cam. They're a famous cannabis company. That girl was cool as fuck, the owner. And another spot that changed the name a bunch of times called Herbal Connections. And they had some fire, bro. I could start naming the strains like Lemon Skunk, Presidential Kush, this Hawaiian shit, Cat Piss. They had all sorts of shit. So I started getting sacks, and then I was doing the same thing that I did when I was in high school. People wanted some bud, I'd go get it, I'd take half, keep half, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get an ounce, dude. And break it down. So I started selling weed out in Colorado, bro. And then I ended up meeting my connects through my bootleg DVDs. I went in the cannabis club. I said, I got these bootleg DVDs. They were buying them off me. They were giving me weed for the DVDs. And I formed a lot of good relationships like that and met a lot of cool people. So now I'm in Colorado. I got the best weed in Colorado. It's Presidential Kush. I got DVDs. And I'm kind of doing something out there. Then I see how balling these fools are that own the cannabis club. They're growing. And I was like, damn, dude, maybe I should look into growing this. Look into growing this shit. Let me look into that real quick. So I bought this DVD from Jorge Cervantes called the Marijuana Bible. It teaches you how to grow, and I started. This was so interesting to me that I wanted to get into cultivation, and that's where my cultivation career started. Was in Colorado. I started looking into how to cultivate marijuana. That was where that started. I ended up moving back to Los Angeles in 2010, but I had to start all over. I didn't have any connections. I had to get a job at Sears in Santa Monica and, live in a little apartment and try to struggle to make ends meet to pay the bills and live in Los Angeles because it's way more expensive, and to transition from a state to state is tough. And I didn't have any clients, and I wasn't selling weed anymore, so it was kind of a tough transition. But I had a bunch of homies out here that were selling weed, and all my friends were back here, so it was a good fucking time. I was happy to be back.
When you come back, what's your transition? Are you now cultivating, or are you just selling?
So at the time, I was just working at Sears because I didn't know. I only had friends out here, but I didn't have any clients. But I had homies out here that were selling weed, pounds of weed, So I was able to work at Sears, hang out with my homies, get weed for, good deals, smoke, kick it in Venice, have a good fucking time. Happy to be back, chilling on the beach and shit like that. So what happened is my boy in Colorado was graduating from art college, and we were like, we're gonna go back out to Colorado and we're gonna fucking celebrate him graduating, and we're gonna go with the boys, and we're gonna try to talk to some of my old friends in Colorado to line up some, if they could move some pounds and shit, we could start bringing some shit out there. So we ended up going out there, had a good fucking time, chilling with the boys, partying and stuff, and I ended up talking to my old cannabis dealer out there, and we ended up making a deal to where I was gonna start selling some packs to Colorado. So I quit the job at Sears, and I started moving a couple packs to Colorado, which went to shit. The dude ended up jacking me. He said the shit didn't get there, and it was a loss. But I was like, fuck that. I want to do this. I want to start selling weed. You know what I mean? Again, I don't want to work a fucking 9 to 5. I want to sell weed and do what my homies are doing. So that's what I did. So then I met through my girl. She and her friend. His boyfriend made music, made beats. I'm not gonna say his name, but he's a famous, producer. Made beats for some pretty cool fucking people. You know what I mean? And he wanted to buy some packs, and I was able to make a few bucks off of that. So that was my first client. I ended up selling him some packs, making a couple bills, and being able to pay my rent. And then so I ended up going into that route. So as I start selling these pounds, I'm looking into cultivation. I'm like, I want to start growing, I'm in LA. I got a couple homies that grow. They're going to show me the ropes. And so we started getting into the cannabis cultivation. My boy showed me how to grow, and we set up a little thing in my closet, and I started with that. And at the same time, through the Colorado connections, I met some people in Florida, and we started moving packs out to Florida and shit. So I was able to, pay my rent and live that lifestyle, just selling packs out of town pretty much, and start my cultivation with cannabis.
So let's go about this.
I'm all over the place.
How does one go about starting to grow weed in their closet?
Take
us through that.
I knew a little bit from that DVD that I got and being in Colorado, but my homie had a 4-lighter or something. And back then, pounds were going for fucking 36 for Bubba.
Well, for those who don't know what a 4-lighter is, explain.
It's 4 light. So there'll be a light to grow cannabis. There's a large light that's HPS, high pressure sodium light bulb, which is similar to the sun. It's very bright, and so you will grow under the light, and you can put a certain amount of plants under each light. So let's say 8 plants under one light, 6 to 8 plants or something like that. So 4 lights is a 4-lighter, which is pretty much like one bedroom. You know what I mean? So my homie had 4 lights set up in a bedroom. And back then it was still kind of hectic. So
I thought it was a closet, you said.
Well, that was mine, so I'm gonna get to that. You know what I mean? He had the shelf that was blocking the door, a makeshift little shelf that he made. He'd swing it open and go in his cannabis room. It was tight. And so he was my boy. Shout out to my boy. I love you, dog. You know what I'm saying? So he's like, yo, I'm gonna put you on, dog. I'm gonna show you how to do this shit. So he came over, gave me a light, gave me some clones. I had some seeds from Colorado too that I brought with me. So I sprouted those shits, and he kind of gave me the rundown on what I need: nutrients, the soil, what the light schedules are, temperature, and shit like that. So I had like one little light in the closet, and I started experimenting a little bit. The neighbors were complaining; it was smelling up the whole fucking apartment building. It was bad, bro. Like, it was bad. The cops came a bunch of times and shit. I was always like dipping out before they got there. They were harassing my girl, and they were like, "If we come one more time, we've been here 3 times. They're coming in," So I had to move. So I ended up moving into another place because the neighbors were complaining so much. Because the smell was so bad. But I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was learning. Because, you got to learn, you know what I mean? And, there's way more information nowadays on all these things, growing mushrooms and cannabis. So back then, you just had to get your hands dirty and get in there.
So let's go into that for a minute, because what's the first mistake most people, because I remember being in high school and trying to grow a bud plant, and I pulled it off. It got pretty big in my closet, just off a regular incandescent light bulb.
Yeah.
And it was working.
Yeah.
My mom wrung my neck for it, but
for sure.
So go into like the first mistakes someone makes.
The temperature, how hot the fucking bulb is, that's a big one, right? Your lighting schedule has to be on a 12 hours light on, 12 hours dark. The plant has to be in, so lights on, lights off. What you're feeding it is a big one. Nutrients, and really the environment itself. Like, I don't think I had a fan in there. It was probably like 99 degrees and shit, 98 degrees. It was hot as fuck. But some of that shit still grew, maybe it grows too close to the bulb and shit like that. And you're just learning how to do this shit, watering it properly, feeding it on time. And sometimes we'd be hungover and I forgot to feed it, and I come in and it'd be all wilted like this. Just droopy. You're like, fuck, dog, I gotta hit it with some water. You throw some tap water on there and then it comes back up. You're like, fuck, dude, so you make a lot of mistakes, bro. Then you get into cloning and you want to do another cycle. So you try to cut some clones, but you don't know what you're doing. A clone is where you take a piece of the plant, you chop off a node of a plant. So it'll be like a stem with a leaf at a certain part of the plant. You put some clone gel on the bottom of the stem, and you'll stick it in a medium, which would be rock wool or cocoa or soil. Roots will grow and you'll have another plant. So you're taking a little piece from the big plant and turning it into another plant. So you're reproducing it without seeds. Most of you should know this by now. I'm just, relating it for the people that don't.
Yeah, but there's people that have no insight to this industry, so you're just giving them a little background.
Correct.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong
We're not
with that.
telling people to go do it.
Exactly. So you got to learn how to, cut clones. You got to learn how to, the environment has to be perfect. You got to learn, and then you get into CO2 levels, adding CO2, harvesting it on time, curing it once it's harvested. That's a big one. You want to learn how to chop it down, cut it, hang it with all the leaves on it, then cut it, put it in a cold environment, however you do it. There's many different ways to do that. But yeah, there's a lot to it. So growing it from seed or clone into a vegetative state where it's just growing, then you switch it into the flower state where the buds start flowering on the plant. That's the third section of the growth period. And then you cut it down, harvest it, dry it, and smoke it or sell it and enjoy your fruits of your labor. And now growing your own cannabis is the shit. If you can pull it off, and you grow some fucking fire, there's nothing more rewarding than growing some bomb-ass bud yourself and smoking it fresh. It's the greatest fucking feeling in the world. It's awesome.
Dope.